So hello, everyone. My name is Tara Moran. I am a librarian at the Mastic Shirley Community Library. Thank you for joining us tonight for our library's monthly program with the National Park Service. And tonight, in honor of William Floyd's birthday this month, we're very happy to host tonight's program, which is Explore the Historic Grounds of the William Floyd Estate. And tonight's program is presented by Kelsey Sucena, a park ranger with the William Floyd Estate. Now, if you have any questions throughout this program, of course, we want to hear from you. Please enter them in the chat box, which should be on your screen below. We will get to them at the end, and there will be time at the end for any questions and answers. So Kelsey, if you're ready, please tell us all about William Floyd's estate.
Yeah, of course. I'm all ready to go. I will share my screen. I put together a PowerPoint sort of slideshow. And I'll be explaining what we're doing today. But my hope is to sort of take you folks into, like in a virtual way, into the physical space of the William Floyd Estate. So let me share my screen now, and I'll have that shared. Ooh, and if I hit play, I'm hoping that you see what we saw before, just the slide, William Floyd Estate virtual guided tour. So I just want to start by introducing myself. My name is Kelsey. I'm a ranger here at Fire Island National Seashore. We oversee the William Floyd Estate. So Fire Island National Seashore, even though it's not, the William Floyd Estate is off of Fire Island, it's managed by the National Seashore. So I spend a lot of my time at the Floyd Estate. I also spend a lot of my time on Fire Island. I've been working as a park ranger now for over 11 years, but my roots in the Tri-Hamlet area go back a lot further than that. I actually grew up in Mastic Beach. I lived for a few years in Shirley, just down the street from the library. And today I live in Brookhaven, so not too much further over. I spent my entire education from kindergarten to 12th grade in the William Floyd School District. My whole life, I've been totally surrounded by the name William Floyd. I drive almost every day down William Floyd Parkway, past a big statue of William Floyd, to work at the William Floyd Estate. So suffice it to say, William Floyd is a name that I know pretty well. But when it comes to the William Floyd Estate, I always tell folks, William Floyd is really just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much history here. It's such a diverse and interesting community to investigate. So even though it's named after William Floyd, there are all of these different points of interest for everyone who comes to the property, a little bit of history for everyone. The truth is, William Floyd, like the William Floyd Estate, is just like a diverse and incredible place, home to more than just William Floyd. But I'll jump in real quick and talk a little bit about William Floyd. I think the obvious question, and the question I hear all the time, is just, who was William Floyd and why are these places named after him? If you know one thing about William Floyd, the thing you probably know is the line, William Floyd signed the Declaration of Independence. In 1776, of course, we had the Declaration of Independence, which launched the American Revolution, helping to found our country today. But then another follow-up question a lot of people ask me is, why was William Floyd a signer of the Declaration of Independence? Why was he chosen to sign the Declaration of Independence? So just to go through a quick biography of William Floyd, he was born on December 17th, 1734. So December 17th will be his birthday. I think very appropriate reason to talk about William Floyd this month. And to really examine him and his legacy. He was the son of a wealthy and somewhat aristocratic landowner, a gentleman named Nickel Floyd, who himself was born into a family that settled on Long Island a generation earlier. So William Floyd was young when he inherited the William Floyd estate after his father passed away in 1755. He was just 20 years old when he suddenly became one of Long Island's and New York's most prominent landowners. Along with the 4,400 acres of land and the business contracts that made his family so influential, William Floyd also inherited several enslaved workers. At the height of the estate, William Floyd was one of the largest slaveholders on Long Island, holding at least 20 enslaved people. Throughout his life, he was a competent statesman. He was a politician. He was a member of the extended Long Island community. He attended churches and often donated money to the churches. So he sort of became this influential businessman here on Long Island. In 1770, his sort of military and political career kind of kicked into gear when he received a colonel's commission in the Suffolk County Militia, and he was elected representative to the First and Second Continental Congress in 1774. Perhaps most famously, William Floyd was a signer of the Declaration of Independence, one of just 4 from New York State that signed in 1776. So William Floyd, obviously, he has this complex legacy. He was really this sort of local focal point for folks. And he was one of the few Long Islanders who actually stood up and protested, British rule. A lot of Long Island throughout its history and throughout the course of the Revolution was primarily like loyalist. But William Floyd and the Suffolk County Militia, as well as some other folks throughout the island, including like spy rings and stuff like that, they were people who did side with the American Revolution. So the story does not end with William Floyd. While William Floyd is really like this focal point for the William Floyd estate, what makes this property truly special for us is the small but sort of interconnected role it plays throughout all of American history, pretty much, in all of its diversity, its struggles, its triumphs. One amazing thing I always tell people about the William Floyd estate is that William Floyd's family continued to live and vacation there all the way up until it entered the national park system in 1976, on the 200th anniversary of the United States, of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And of course, the family which owned the land is only the tip of the iceberg there, as communities of indigenous Long Islanders, enslaved, indentured, and free workers, and visitors from all walks of life had a massive impact on the development of the William Floyd estate over the course of 2 centuries. Today, the William Floyd estate offers us ways to better understand the complex dynamics of history in the United States, of New York, of Long Island, and of our home here in Mastic Beach. So just to provide you with an overview of the William Floyd estate, I'm sure you're all already familiar with this, but of course, this is Long Island over here. The William Floyd estate is situated on the central sort of south shore of Long Island. You can actually see it from space. It's kind of neat. If you take a look, it's this little dark spot right here, sort of surrounded by light suburbs all the way around it. It's this sort of, you can tell it's an underdeveloped space. So we'll zoom in a little closer. Oh, hold on. Sorry. Oh, I lost my, we zoomed in. Okay, cool. I had a problem with my slideshow there for a moment. A little closer, we can see the sort of Tri-Hamlet area. You can see Mastic, Shirley. I believe the library is right over here. The Fire Island National Seashore Wilderness Visitor Center is over here. And of course, tucked in right on the eastern side of the peninsula here is the William Floyd estate. A couple other really important things we can see from here. Of course, we have Forge River. Forge River is a very important part of the community. Puspatak, which we'll talk a little bit about later, is situated right up here along Puspatak Creek. We can also see, if we zoom in just a little closer, we can see Home Creek here. We can see Lawns Creek over here. We're going to talk a little bit more about Lawns Creek a little later. And so this is sort of a closer view of the William Floyd estate. I just want to point out some of the features, really what we're going to be focusing on today. And you should see my mouse, right? I'm not just telling you. What you should see, what we're going to talk about today is right here. This is the historic core of the William Floyd estate. The historic core is where most of the buildings remain today. But of course, the historic core is just a very small portion of the entire property. You can see down here what we usually refer to as the lower acreage, a lot more land. You can see it's mostly defined by forests and some small agricultural fields that remain to this day. And then, of course, on the southernmost portion of what is today the William Floyd estate is this beautiful salt marsh, which is an amazing place to go if you're looking to see osprey, bald eagles you can see out there in the salt marsh. Of course, you can also see mosquitoes, so maybe not the place for everyone. And I just want to zoom out real quick because, of course, this is the William Floyd Estate today. But when William Floyd was there, the William Floyd Estate was much larger, 4,400 acres of land that extended from Forge River pretty much all the way up. It was about a mile wide and 7 miles long, extended north of the airport all the way up to right around where Brookhaven National Lab is today. So this is a big chunk of land. And of course, what we have today is just a tiny portion of all of that land. Now, when you pull into the William Floyd Estate, this is probably one of the first things you're going to say. You'll find a parking area. We have free parking available at the Floyd Estate. We also have bathrooms. We have a little trailhead with information and brochures for folks. And this is where I'm going to start our virtual tour. Last time I did this program, we sort of went on a timeline. We did a tour through time from like the earliest part of the history here at the Floyd Estate up until the 1970s, although we sort of focused on the late 1800s, right? This time around, I was thinking instead of time, we'd talk about space. And I would take you on a virtual tour throughout the property for a couple reasons. For starters, the William Floyd Estate this year, this was the first year it was open 7 days a week, which is a really exciting update, at least the first year, I should say, as long as I've been here, that it's open 7 days a week. So that's really exciting. Of course, it's closed right now. We do close it for the winter season when it becomes hard to winterize the facilities and keep trails clear during snowfall. So it is closed right now. So I'm taking you there, hopefully in a virtual capacity. But we usually open, if not before Memorial Day, we're usually open by Memorial Day. And I really hope that some of you folks will come visit. So when you walk down the boardwalk, you're going to be walking towards the Old Mastic House. You could be forgiven for looking around and imagining the forest that you're walking through, which surrounds you, as being similar to the forest, what the forest might have looked like before the arrival of the Floyd family. The truth, however, is a little bit more complicated, as much of these forests were, upon the arrival of the Floyd family, they were cut and converted into farmland for a long period of time. That means that many of these thickets of forest are not necessarily the sort of pristine, untouched landscapes we imagine when we imagine nature sometimes. These are themselves actually sort of successional landscapes, ones that came in after long ago they were converted into agricultural fields. So we see a lot more, black cherry here than hardwood trees that might have been growing before. Larger oaks and stuff like that. Although we do see a lot of oaks, we see a lot of pines, we see a lot of maples on the property as well. And of course, long before the Floyds arrived, this land was home to the Unkechaug people, who had their own impact on the landscape. They sort of shaped it themselves long before any Europeans came by. Today, the Unkechaug Nation is centered nearby at the Puspatak Reservation, where we talked about that a little while ago. Puspatak means where the waters meet, and it makes sense. It's right along Puspatak Creek, where the Forge River and Puspatak meet. It is also one of the oldest recognized Native American reservations in the United States. I believe it's recognized by New York State. It's not recognized federally. Over the centuries, the Unkechaug have fished, they've farmed on this land, they've hunted, and they've worked on this land. When European colonists first arrived in the 17th century, they utilized these complex legal systems and these sort of foreign bureaucratic procedures to dispossess indigenous Long Islanders of much of their land, conferring ownership to individuals and making large claims such as the Manor of St. George, and I can talk more on the Manor of St. George later if you folks would like, which was originally patented to William Tangier Smith. While the land that would become the William Floyd Estate was originally deeded to Unkechaug in perpetuity, from the Manor of St. George, it was later sold by the Smith family to William Floyd's grandfather, Richard Floyd II. Soon after purchasing more than 4,000 acres of land in 1718, laborers for the Floyd family began the backbreaking work of sort of clearing these fields, building ditches, planting and tending crops, and doing all of these agricultural and domestic jobs that were required to establish and operate a farm of this scale. This work was largely performed by indentured servants and enslaved people until slavery ended in New York in 1827 after the gradual manumission law. And indentured servitude was eventually phased out by the Floyds in the mid-19th century. Later on, immigrant wage labor would enter the mix in the 1840s, and that continued until the 20th century. So as you walk through this space, just imagine all of the different communities of people that have lived and worked here and really shaped it. You look at the landscape around you and you think that this is a perfectly pristine and natural space. But the truth is, even this space has changed so much over time, and human hands have been present shaping this landscape for thousands of years, long before even the colonial period. You may see as you walk these little ditches and mounds, these ditch and mound systems, which were used to mark the edges of what are today like abandoned fields, would have been agricultural fields back in the day. You might see a couple lopped trees, these trees that were cut down to sort of create living fences, which is kind of amazing. And you would have also seen cleared fields where you may see cleared fields where corn, rye, wheat, clover, and other crops were grown. So then you pop out of the forest and suddenly you're transported to a whole different world. You see in the distance, the Old Mastic House, you see this big lawn, you see this big, beautiful linden tree. I've heard, and I have to confirm this, but that this is one of the tallest linden trees in New York. It's a big, beautiful feature we have on the property. And just part of the natural landscape, one of the things that makes this a really fantastic sort of natural space for us too. So Nickel Floyd established the home here. This was William Floyd's grandfather. He lived between 1705 and 1755. When he built the house, he situated it about a mile back from the water. From this location, the home was not only protected from the harshest winds and storms, kept away from the bay so that hurricanes and stuff wouldn't damage the house, but it also provided the family with a view of the activities of the lower acreage, right, where a lot of the farming, a lot of the agricultural activity was happening. It also provided them a view of Mauritius Bay and Fire Island as well. So there is this deep connection with Fire Island where the families vacation and where all of this business sort of passed through. So enslaved workers developed the lower acreage into this elaborate system of grids. When we were looking at the aerial photo, you could see some of those grids today. Many of them have grown in quite a bit, but we do still maintain some so that you can see the sort of agricultural character of the property. You'll also see pastures, you'll see ponds, and you'll see other features on the property. So the farm itself actually prospered through the late 18th century into the early 19th century, as William Floyd and his son Nicole employed skilled labor, enslaved labor, free and indentured labor from indigenous folks from Puspatak, as well as free day laborers. When the Floyds scaled back and eventually started to abandon farming in the late 19th century, they continued to maintain this property. They maintained the trails, they maintained the fields, and they maintained it for recreation and hunting mainly. It became a little bit of a vacation place. John Treadwell Nichols, the husband of William Floyd's great-great-granddaughter Cornelia, was curator of birds and fishes for the Museum of Natural History in New York. So for John and his son David, the estate was this invaluable resource for the study of birds and animals, and it actually continues to be a resource for the study of birds and animals to this day. It's just now park rangers who are doing all the research. While you wander the estate, you might even come across little box turtles. They're these really beautiful, almost tortoise-like turtles that you'll see walking around the property. They've got little yellow spots on their backs. They're sort of brown and black. Some of them have these bright red eyes, really gorgeous turtles. If you're really lucky, you may see a turtle that was marked way back in the day by John, by his son David, and even now by National Park Service staff. They did this project. It's actually the longest running project of its kind on box turtles, where they actually marked the shells of the turtles with information. Every time they found the turtle, they would look it up and see, you know, how old it was when it was first tagged, where it was tagged, how big it was, and all of this other really cool information. So there were box turtles that were tagged, that were seen, that were tagged, that are over 100 years old, which is kind of cool. Think of all of this human history, just this massive amount of information just passing through this place. And here's a small turtle who's been here the whole time. So as you start to walk across the lawn on the south sides, right, it's looking away from the house, you may see this. This is the Vista View. The Vista View is really cool. It did a couple of things for the family. It's basically just this big break in the trees that was originally cleared by John Gelston Floyd Jr., a later generation of Floyd family members in the late 19th century. It was called the Vista. And it was intended to provide a view of the shore and bay. It used to be wide enough, and there's actually a lot of phragmites down at the end, so you can't necessarily see the ocean and bay anymore. But back in the day when it was a little wider and there was less phragmites, you could see all the way to the bay. And most importantly, it brought a breeze up from the shore, right? Because they didn't have air conditioning back then. So it got really hot around there. So you needed something to provide a little bit of a breeze. Talking quickly about the Old Mastic House, I do want to say the Old Mastic House, some folks may already know this, but the Old Mastic House is currently closed for renovations. We're doing a bunch of different things inside of the house and on the house. I think the next big project is going to be the roofing project, which may have started already. It might have started recently, or it may be getting ready to start up in the new year. The roof has to be replaced. It's one of those jobs that you can't skip on. Obviously, we have a collection inside, and you don't want any of those materials damaged due to a leaky roof. So we're redoing the roof. I'm honestly hoping that the house might be closed a little longer too, because there's all sorts of work that we do need to do, things like stabilizing the chimney. And I got my fingers crossed that we'll be able to do that, especially leading into 2026 in celebration of the 250th anniversary of the United States, which would also be close to the 50th anniversary of the establishment of the William Floyd Estate as a National Park Service site. So just to talk a bit about this house, it was built by the Floyd family. The first part was built around 1724. That was like the central part. That was built by William Floyd's father, Nickel. Richard Floyd I, Nickel's grandfather, originally immigrated to Setauket, New York, around 1667 from Brecknockshire, Wales. I apologize if I'm not pronouncing Brecknockshire right. He became one of the earliest colonists on Long Island and was one of the largest holders in the town of Brookhaven. Enslaved, indentured, and free labor were all employed in the construction of this house, just as they were for the clearing of fields. It was to begin this sort of small but substantial 6-room family starter home. But as the family grew and the needs changed, each generation of Floyd family member, they sort of left their own mark on it. They sort of changed over time, changing the functions of the spaces while also building new spaces onto it. So you'll see sort of the main part of the house. The oldest part is the real center of the house over here. Later on, wings were added. There was actually another wing, a sort of west wing. That was the plantation office that was taken away sometime in the mid-1800s. And then on the opposite side of the house, we have some of the newer wings. We have like this new kitchen that was built, and it's really neat because you walk through it and it's like the 60s era kitchen, and some additional add-ons. So it's like this house that's just come together in a very like sort of improvisational way over time, with each successive generation adding their own mark on it. So this picture was the best picture I could sort of make. It's kind of hard to tell, but this is something called the Pikal. And what I'm pointing at is really this grassland. It kind of looks like a grassland right here that's in front of the trees that we have in the distance. Now I say it changes a lot throughout the year. So we actually mow it every single year, every single season as the family mowed it. And so this open field sort of becomes a flat sort of grass, like grass lawn. Over the course of the winter, it gets really muddy. In the spring, it starts to spring up with new life. And over the course of the summer, it grows in, and you actually start to see small trees growing here, things like black cherry and stuff like that. So what the Pikal is it's this sort of semi-wild space that's in between the forest we have in the distance and the flat field we have in front of the house. When we saw before, it was sort of like in flat grass field. And there's a little bit more going on here. You can see a lot taller grasses. You can also sometimes in the year, you'll start to see trees and things growing in this area. So the term Pikal was coined by Gelston Floyd Sr. It was to the term Pikal, which is sometimes pronounced pickle. I've heard it pronounced pickle before. I always thought it was funny on the lawn, this thing called a pickle. Actually has its origins in Old English. Its phonetic spelling, it's like a phonetic spelling of the word pidal. So folks may know the word pidal, which referred to a small enclosure near a house or a piece of land in an open field. So this was the sort of open space. It initially served as the headlands to the agricultural fields and pastures of the lower acreage. A brief break in the landscape between the sort of manicured lawn that we have in front of the house and the sort of commercial enterprise that was happening further down the fields. By the 1860s, however, the Floyd family, they chose to pretty much give up farming in favor of careers in politics and law and science and things like that. As the house sort of slowly moved to becoming a summer retreat and a hunting reservation and a place for entertaining guests, the Pikal became the sort of borderland that grew between the home and the forest. Today, it continues to serve as this really cool haven for wild birds and other animals. I see turkeys hanging out in the Pikal all the time. You see box turtles in the Pikal. You see lots of different migrating songbirds and things like that. So the bird watching here is really good. Just past the Pikal, if you folks are familiar with the Floyd Estate, you may know there's a small flagpole. We have the American flag waving up there. And just past the flagpole is a trail that leads off into the forest. This trail is called Squirrel Lane. It was originally made by a gentleman who was referenced in family records as Uncle John. And it provided a route between the William Floyd Estate and the Puspatak Reservation. So these were two places that were very well interconnected. It is one of many roads that was established by workers on the property to provide the Floyds with access to fields, ponds, meadows, and everything throughout their estate, right? Along this road was situated an orchard and a place where they could graze cattle. This road was also a vital corridor for the people who lived and worked here. Cabins which housed enslaved and later free servants were scattered throughout the woods between the manor house and Puspatak Reservation a little north on land that is now developed for residential use, so places where people have their homes today. Unkechaug workers, free and enslaved blacks, and merchants would have been common travelers along this rustic path. Laborers at the William Floyd Estate engaged in a wide range of work, including agriculture, animal husbandry, domestic housework. The Unkechaug were also accomplished whalers. They were very famous for their skill as whalers. The Unkechaug maintained a close relationship to the estate's enslaved and black laborers. They often intermarried, raised children, worshipped, ate, farmed, and celebrated with each other. So there's this I like to imagine this space as this bustling intersection between all of these communities where everyone from William Floyd himself and Floyd family members would have walked down here to their neighbors at Puspatak. So then at the end of Squirrel Lane, if you walk down Squirrel Lane, I wouldn't go in the middle of the summer because it's really mosquito-y down there, but if you can brave the mosquitoes, or if you want to go in the spring, really great time of year to visit, you'll get to the family cemetery and the White Cross Memorial, which is situated just at the end of Squirrel Lane. The family cemetery was established in 1755 after the death of William Floyd's parents, Nicole and Tabitha Floyd, who died during a typhoid epidemic of all things. The nearly 1/4 acre, it's like 1/4 acre in size, and it is the burial ground for over 60 Floyd family members and 3 family servants, a woman named Ellen Craven, and a couple named Ellen and James S. Clark. So the Clarks, they were close friends of the family in the late 1800s. Visitors are encouraged to walk through the graveyard, but we ask you to be respectful, exercise caution, and when you're here in the summer, definitely want to watch out for ticks, especially out here. You may look for, all sorts of different cool headstones, different bits of history. You may look for little Richard Dick Thornton Floyd's stone. You may look for the large table stone, which actually in the picture you can see right back here. That large table stone originally marked William Floyd's grave in Westernville, New York. So contrary to what a lot of people think, William Floyd is not buried in the cemetery. He's buried up in Westernville, which is the home he had after the end of the American Revolution, the Revolutionary War. He sort of left the William Floyd estate today to his family, to his kids, or to his son, and moved upstate. So that's where he's buried today. He actually built basically an exact replica of the house. It's kind of cool. In 1895, the Floyd family decided to honor their ancestors' birthday. They decided to honor William Floyd's birthday by erecting a monument in place of the more conservative table stone. So this table stone, the one that we have here today, is the table stone that originally marked his grave. And then they built this big monument. And when they built the big monument, they moved the table stone down here so that the family here could commemorate it as well. So that's what we have laying here today. And then you'll see, if you look back here, something really interesting. We have this white cross memorial with some names painted on it. So behind the family cemetery, and I think notably segregated from the rest of the space, stand a series of white crosses. And these crosses bear the names of Black laborers who worked at the William Floyd estate. While some writings do suggest that these crosses mark actual graves, the historical records of the estate are much less clear. It is possible that these crosses don't actually mark the graves themselves, but are actually more memorials. And so that's something we're still trying to investigate, trying to really get into the records to find what the truth is. And it's very possible that these folks were actually buried elsewhere with their families and in their communities. So our research into these names is ongoing, but some of the names are coming into focus. Lon is one of the crosses. Lon likely referred to a gentleman by the name of London Edwards, who was sometimes called Uncle Lon or Lun by Floyd family members. We don't know everything about, all the details about his birth or how he came to be at the William Floyd estate, but we do know from records from a census in 1850 that he was born in New York around 1775, so just 1 year before the signing of the Declaration of Independence. He was an agricultural laborer enslaved by William Floyd and his son, Nickel, and he was manumitted or released from slavery around 1820 under the terms of gradual manumission in New York State. After manumission, Lon continued to work on the estate's farm along with his wife, Hannah. He took pride in his boats and is remembered for navigating the creeks around there, Home Creek and Mauritius Bay, in search of eels, crabs, and bunker. All the same things we're trying to catch from the water today. Like other enslaved people at the William Floyd estate, Lon and Hannah lived in a cabin about a mile away from the manor house in what is today the neighborhood. Their cabin along the banks of what became known as Lawns Creek was an informal gathering spot for the community of Black and Indigenous workers traveling between Puspatak, the other cabins, and the William Floyd estate itself. So I think it's really cool. We're going to talk about Lon in just a second again, but I think it's really neat. A lot of folks actually live along Lawns Creek, and there are streets named after him. This is a gentleman who really made his mark in the community. He was his home was the focal point of a lot of community activity. And so this is actually a place called Lawns Balk, so we're in the cemetery now. We leave the cemetery. We're walking back down Squirrel Lane. We're heading back towards the house in our virtual tour. As you walk back towards the house, if you look on the right-hand side, right, if you're looking north, you're going to see this sort of hill with a lot of trees growing on it. That is called Lawns Balk. The wooded space was called Lawns Balk after this gentleman named London Edwards. Throughout the site, many other places retain the names of men who labored here. There's a spot called Jean's Grove. There's a place called Uncle Steve's Garden. There's a spot called Red's Orchard. And all of those were named after people who were either enslaved on the property or who worked on the property. So their names are still here and present in the space, which I think is one of the really cool things about it. In the 19th century, like sort of a little later, Squirrel Lane became the preferred method of approach to the Old Mastic House. So in the late 1800s, early 1900s, right up until they had automobiles on the property, this was the main route in and out. Around the 1940s, 1950s, the area around it started to be developed as a suburban landscape, what we now know today as like the community of Mastic Beach, many of us live in. And sort of this path became closed off as the community around it built up. So walking down past Lawns Balk, we're heading back up Squirrel Lane. We get through Squirrel Lane, we're looking at the field. If you look off to the right, you can see the Old Mastic House, and just a little further to the right, a little further north of where we were, we come to the Old Masta Camp. This was a small green building. Today, you can probably find rangers hanging out in there. That's our main office. It was also for a long time the sort of servants' quarters, an extra space for travelers. And a big part of this building's history is that it was basically a retreat, a place where guests who didn't want to stay in the Old Mastic House along with everyone else, they could camp out in this small green building. It was a little bit more rustic, a little bit more private. So this was like a sort of vacation space. Call it an old Airbnb, although they knew like they would have been very close to the family. The building itself was actually constructed around 1899 as a storage building for the kitchen. So one of the funny things about this building is that even though it's now a little further away from the house, when it was first built, it was right up against the side of the house. So they actually took this and moved it a little bit and placed it where it is today. And it was this extra sort of guest space after it was like the sort of kitchen space. Around 1921 is when it was moved to its current location. It became a place to sort of house servants. Cornelia, who inherited the estate in 1903 with her brother William and their sister Rosalie, they posted this list of rules for their guests. And I always thought these rules were really funny because when you read through the rules, you can imagine somebody today writing them. And so I just like wrote or made note of some of these interesting rules, and I'll read them to you now. One of the rules for staying here was guests in charge of the establishment were chosen because of their affability, adaptability, and capability. Any dissatisfaction should at once be reported to the mismanagement. So it's like putting the blame on people if they want to complain. The old house, this is another one. The old house can best be set on fire by dropping a lamp. Carrying candles is monotonously safe. So you can imagine people wanting to carry a lamp to get more light and being told, no, you've got to carry a candle around. And I think this one is my favorite because we still experience this today. Quote, the unusual guest is silently impervious to mosquitoes. So mosquitoes have always been a problem at the William Floyd Estate. The family has lots of little anecdotes written in their records about people who are just annoyed by the presence of mosquitoes. So even to this day, when we're slapping mosquitoes off of ourselves, it's fun to remember that this is something people have dealt with for a long time. Past the Old Mastic House is a building on the right. It looks like a barn. It's called the Carriage House. The Carriage House was originally built in 1884 by John Gelston Floyd Jr. We mentioned a little while ago as the gentleman who did the Vista View, later generation of Floyd family members. It replaced this wagon house that had been located a little further west, sort of along the road where what is now like the visitors parking lot where folks will come in. So the large doors open to this space, which carries now 2 wagons. They would have also had harnesses in there, saddle, and carriage equipment all stored in adjacent rooms, which were through the smaller doors that you see here on the right-hand side or on the left-hand side, right? So we have the 2 main carriages that came in here. As you walk past the carriage house, you kind of come into this open space, this space we call the barnyard. The barnyard was really like near the house, the sort of central area for the farm. It was just sort of, it looks like a backyard today, and there's a series of buildings, and I'll run through what each of those buildings were. All of those buildings were tended to by workers, either enslaved or indentured servants in the late 18th and 19th century, or later immigrant and local labor in the late 19th and 20th centuries. There was a gentleman by the name of Charles H. Ross, who served as the estate's caretaker from 1876 to 1913. He sort of described his life in brief memoirs that tell us so much about what happened here and what the space was like when he lived here. Through his recollections, we learn a lot about this property and a lot about what life was like here and what it was like to be employed by the Floyds. His descriptions help us to understand the sort of roles, the skills, and personalities of his fellow workers, and it's a source for us. It's what gives us a lot of information about the space. So on the right-hand side, just as you enter the barnyard, you're going to see the small building here. This small structure standing just next to the carriage house, you can see the carriage house right over here, is over 100 years old, and it's been holding firewood for 100 years. It was likely originally adapted from a pigsty, which explains its awkward shape, sort of small side where you can imagine the pig's food being, the rest of the building where the pigs would have stood. But later on, it was very briefly sort of a pigsty, and later on it was turned into this woodshed where they kept their firewood. Firewood was really important. It still is to us today. I'm burning some firewood in our fireplace over here. Long before electricity and heating were common features in homes, firewood was this like super critical resource. It was a way that people got through the frigid Long Island winters. When you move past the woodshed, the next building you're going to see is a little strange, right? It almost looks like an old-fashioned jail, right? This is called the corn crib, just past the woodshed a little bit. This building was called the corn crib because it was this crib for corn. It was a place they used to put corn. It was designed with these slats, unlike a lot of the other buildings on the property. It was designed with slats which allowed for the circulation of air and the dry storage of corn, right? So this would sort of help to aerate corn, dry it out, and prepare it for the rest of the season. Similar designs were actually originally first developed by Native Americans in the area. It was later adapted by European colonists. The corn crib was constructed. This corn crib, or where this corn crib stands, this corn crib was from 1972. So this isn't like a very old corn crib, but it was designed to replace pretty much an older corn crib that was built in the 19th century. So it's in the same exact location as the original corn crib, but it was destroyed. So the family rebuilt it. Corn was just one of many crops that was farmed at the William Floyd Estate. It also wasn't always the primary crop of the Floyd Estate. Originally, oat, flax, wheat, rye, and other grains were sort of the dominant crop here and throughout Long Island in the early 19th century. Later on, corn became more popular. Really later on, though, as it transitioned away from being a plantation, cattle was the big thing. So they would have grown corn, flax, oat, and things like that, not to sell, but to feed the cattle that they were then selling, whether it was sheep or cows or pigs. An 1804 ledger by Nickel Floyd II, so this was William Floyd's son who inherited the property, recorded selling just 10 bushels of corn and 20 bushels of another kind of corn, so 30 bushels of corn in total. By the mid-19th century, corn had grown in popularity across the country, and in 1860, John Gelston Floyd Sr. wrote that he expected to produce 5,000 bushels of corn. So you can imagine a ton of these corn cribs around the property used to store and dry corn. Just across the way from the corn crib are these two sort of smaller barns now. These would have contained livestock. It would have also contained farming tools, machinery. They were really an essential part of life here at the William Floyd Estate. Behind these two barns, in what is like now the small forested area, would have stood two larger barns, a barn for sheep called the Merrifield Sheep Barn and the Robinson's Barn, which stored cows. These were these two massive two-story barns that used to tower over this whole barnyard. They eventually sort of started to deteriorate and fall apart, and eventually the family removed them. But it's neat because sometimes you still come across artifacts from both of those barns. So these two barns are somewhat newer barns. They're also much smaller barns. They mainly house farming equipment today, so you can visit and see some of the tools folks would have used. These were made from salvaged wood of one of those earlier larger barns, so same material. In 1898, John Gelston Floyd Jr. Had a windmill erected on the roof of the barn with a water tank that provided running water to the house. I always thought that was kind of an interesting note. So you can imagine this tall two-story barn back here with this water tower on top. And that's how they got water pressure to the house. Across the way, you might miss it if you don't know what you're looking for, is this small sort of triangular structure. This is called the ice house. The ice house had this sort of 15-foot deep brick tub, and you can actually go and visit and see the ice house. The architecture is really cool. You just look down into this hole, and that brick tub was really important. It was originally built in the late 19th century, and it provided the family with cold storage. So before we had refrigerators, we had ice houses. The basic science behind this ice house is really interesting. There's this brick tub that goes down into the earth. Of course, the coolness of the earth is an important part of the cooling process. And then in the winter, they would go and they would cut layers of ice. They would cut layers of ice from home creek or purchase it from town, and they would actually layer ice. Then they would layer it with salt marsh hay that they gathered from the lower acreage. They would have added more ice, more hay, more ice, more hay, more ice, and just layers and layers of ice. I'm told that like that much ice in this ice house could actually survive the whole summer, providing the family refrigeration. They would just put things on top of the ice pile, and as the ice pile melted, water would drain out through the sides, and as it melted, you would just have to crawl down a ladder to get to the bottom. There's this really great little note from Cornelia Floyd Nichols, who is one of the last Floyd family members to live in the house. She wrote in her records, and I'm quoting, "Hidden in it and there might be found a case of ginger ale, or the Sunday roast brought home on Friday to avoid a trip up street on Saturday. Or, after my husband, John Treadwell Nichols, entered the family, a dead bird or fish waiting to be examined at the Museum of Natural History." So you can imagine all the weird things that were put in this ice house. It was built originally in the late 19th century. It replaced a blacksmith shop that was around in the late 18th century. And then just past the ice house, there's a small shed. We're not going to talk about that shed. We actually still use it as a shed today. So there's a bunch of stuff in there, mostly equipment that we use to maintain the houses and the buildings. And then just past the shed is this building here. This is what we call the old shop, near the back end of the barnyard. It was constructed in the early 19th century, so early 1800s, and was originally used as a granary. It stored wheat, rye, and other grains that were harvested on the site to dry out and be stored pretty much for the winter months. As farming, again, we were talking about this plantation sort of transitioning from being a farm to being like a vacation place. Farming became less important here at the William Floyd Estate. And this building was eventually converted into a workshop for Charles Ross, who was that gentleman I talked about before. Windows were cut into the side of the structure. So these windows were actually basically like dug, cut out. They sort of let in light into the old shop. So you would have seen boxes of tools and nails and everything just sort of littering the space. You can still sort of see that today. One fun thing I like to point out is we have this beautiful chimney. Check it out when you're down here. This chimney is really neat. It comes into the building up pretty high, and you'll see what's underneath the chimney supporting it is this large stump I just think this is an absolutely fascinating solution to a problem. They didn't have as much material as they would have liked to build these sort of chimneys. And so they just built it up high and put a big stick under it for support. You can still see that today. It's one of the really neat things about it. Over his 37 years at the William Floyd Estate, Ross experienced all of the changes of the estate. He really saw it transition from being a plantation to being this vacation space, from the decline of the working farm to the development of the estate as this gathering space for the family to enjoy the summer together, pretty much. He spent much of his time in this building. This is where he repaired all of the equipment he needed to manage the livestock. So they still would have had sheep, cows, pigs. They would have had less of that, but they would have needed somebody to take care of those things. Excuse me. And they would have needed somebody to, build saddles and all sorts of stuff like that. That was Charles Ross's job. Yeah. So this is his space. I don't want to, we're getting up close to time, so I'm going to hurry up through the last few. This is the incinerator, this awkward looking sort of concrete and metal box that you'll see at the edge of the barnyard. Now we're starting to leave the barnyard and we'll be going up a trail that leads us back towards the parking lot. This is an incinerator. At the very end of the barnyard, you'll see it standing. It's kind of this awkward sort of out of place thing, This is very odd looking structure, but the incinerator was a very important part of life at the estate, where trash was actually beginning to become a problem. In August 1852, Sarah Kirkland Floyd wrote her husband, John Gelston Floyd Sr., about her dismay of the condition of the barnyard. It was a mess and she didn't like it. Martin Van Buren's son, John Van Buren, had visited the estate and he asked to see the barns. He wanted to check it out. He wanted to look at the farmland. She wrote to her husband, Sarah Kirkland wrote to her husband, John Gelston Floyd Sr., quote, knowing all the time, she was trying to make all these excuses to keep them from going back there because there was all this garbage and junk all over the place. And she wrote this, quote, in a letter to him, knowing all the time they would not have looked any better if you had been here, you careless fellow. So they did not go through the gutter, now 1/2 a foot deep with green putrid water, or see the vile wood pile or trash building up around the outbuildings. So there's garbage everywhere. There's these putrid piles of pools of water, and there are these nasty wood piles just rotting around the property. They had a trash problem. They needed to do something to solve the trash problem. Martin Van Buren's son was here. What were we supposed to do? We had to make it look nice. Well, this incinerator was brought in as a solution, or one kind of solution to the problem, long before we had local municipal garbage folk to come down and take our garbage for us. So trash was, as it remains today, always this struggle. And so they relied on this incinerator basically to burn the trash, all the way up until the 20th century, actually, when the family decided, sort of to tackle that problem. Archaeological digs of refuse pits around the property have yielded all sorts of really amazing things. We've discovered toothbrushes, ceramic dishes, tobacco pipes, and more things that were discarded in these little piles, including areas around the incinerator. And so just leaving, we're heading out. This is the departing trail. This will take us up towards the bathrooms, the parking lot where we started, and the exit gate. This is where we sort of end our virtual journey together. Hopefully you'll be able to come in person and do this journey with us for real. Before we finish though, I wanted to read this little poem. This was written in 1931 by a visitor who wrote this farewell to his hosts in the Old Mastic House guest book. And the poem goes like this, and I think it's super cute. The clock is on the very last tick that ends this pleasant time at Mastic. If time could only be more elastic and plastic and stretch itself more like elastic, why then there'd be no end to Mastic. Farewell to host and lovely hostess. Farewell to birds and beast and ghosties. And you, mosquitoes, last farewell. and may you like other guests as well. So there again with the mosquitoes. The William Floyd Estate has long been the center of this vibrant community. It's from its namesake, William Floyd, who signed the Declaration of Independence, to the enslaved workers who tended this land, who built this house, who made this place what it is today. The Untitled who lived here long before anyone from Europe arrived, long before the Floyds arrived, thousands of years. And even today, we still see Floyd family descendants and descendants of the folks who lived and worked here visiting the property. And I really hope to sort of welcome you here too. This is, of course, preserved again by Fire Island National Seashore. This is your park. This is a place that we want to make special for you, and we hope to welcome everyone here. So that's kind of the end. I do want to say we have some neat things going on. There's a new self-guided app-based tour, which is very similar to what I just did, but you can check that out if you want. We'll also be hosting a variety of programs throughout the year. I know I said that the grounds are closed right now, but through the winter, we often have sporadic programs like bird watching programs, biking programs, stuff like that. So if you want to join us on a program on one of the days that we open the Floyd Estate this winter, check out our website calendar at nps.gov/FIIS. That's for Fire Island. When you go there, you'll see a calendar. We update that calendar on a monthly basis. So you'll see all of our programs for the month, including ones at the William Floyd Estate. So again, my name is Kelsey. I'm from Fire Island National Seashore, managed by the National Park Service and U.S. Department of the Interior. Thank you all for hanging out. I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm going to hang out for a little bit if you guys have any questions. But first, I have to find there. Stop sharing.
Very nice as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, cool.
I would show you this is probably.
So yeah, if you folks have any questions, you're welcome to ask. I'm also around if you want to just chit chat later on. Yeah.
What? I don't understand.
You could ask questions now.
Is Squirrel Lane still accessible?
Yeah, Squirrel Lane. So it's accessible from the property. You would be at the Floyd Estate. Basically today looks like, actually it's this picture behind me, so I'll point to it. It looks like this trail that leads off into the forest. It's right next to the house. And you can still walk it today. It doesn't lead on the out. It doesn't lead to the outside of the property because it basically goes into a person's backyard now. So there's no opposite side of Squirrel Lane, but it did used to go to Puspatak. I see Bonnie's question, where is the statue of him? There's a statue of William Floyd. If you've ever walked down William Floyd Parkway, you'll see a gentleman with a cane right over by where I think they have the Christmas tree out right now, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
Yeah, that little space. So if you want to see the statue of William Floyd, it's standing there.
So the Untitled were a big part of the William Floyd family.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they were very closely, they worked with the Floyds, they worked for the Floyd family. They also preceded the Floyd family. They've been here for thousands of years, them and their ancestors. So I love that bit of history. I think it's fascinating.
You mentioned one of the Treadwells as part of the Untitled Reservation. Are any of the Treadwells still part of the William Floyd Estate?
Oh, that's a good question. The Treadwell family, they sort of married in and out of the Floyd family over the years. John Treadwell Nichols is the name that I'm thinking about. Off the top of my head, I apologize because I don't remember all of the details. But
one of the Treadwells drove a school bus from William Floyd School.
Oh my gosh, that's so cool. Wow, yeah, we do get you'll see names around, you'll see the Smiths around still, you'll see the Nichols around still, you'll see the Floyds, they even come to visit every now and then. I believe a former governor of Massachusetts is a Floyd family member. Yeah, you still see them around.
It was very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions?
What?
Do you want to leave now?
Yeah.
Well, Kelsey, I want to say thank you on behalf of the library and all of us here. I know this was a very interesting conversation, and to see the grounds and the barns, it's very nice, very nice. And if anyone else has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or speak. I just want to tell you that our next program with the National Park Service will be in January. That will be Wednesday, January 12th. And we'll be discussing the wilderness in your backyard, learning about Otis Pike High Dune Wilderness. And Kelsey will be joining us for that presentation too. To register for that program, visit us at communitylibrary.org/programs, or of course, give us a call at the library, 631-399-1511. I don't see any other questions in the chat. Again, I'd like to thank all of you for attending. Kelsey, thank you again for another great program. And we really do look forward to seeing you next month. Happy holidays, everyone.
Same to you.
Enjoy.
Happy holidays. See you soon.
Okay, can I have a wood back?